Welcome to episode 29 of the FoodGrads Podcast, the podcast where we explore careers in the food, beverage, and hospitality industries. I'm your host, Veronica Hislop, a molecular science graduate student and career partner with FoodGrads. This week on the podcast, I interviewed Marc Wall, VP of Sales and co-owner of Sandy Shore Farms Limited, Canada's largest grower and shipper of fresh asparagus. In this episode, Marc spoke to me about the history of Sandy Shore Farms, how his family immigrated to Canada, and the story of the farm and its perseverance. I learned more about what Marc does as a VP of Sales and why he decided to come back to the family farm despite going out of province for university. In addition, Marc talked to me about the story of asparagus and how it goes from the farm to your fork. What's interesting about fresh produce in comparison to ready-to-eat products like in canned goods or boxed goods is that produce has a very short shelf life in comparison, and when things go wrong on the transportation side, people like Marc have to work very fast in order to come up with a solution to this problem, which Marc talks about in this episode and what he considers. Overall, Marc has a great attitude about things, and you really feel that the advice that he gives is something that he goes by in life. In this episode, he really brings to light the current landscape of agriculture and how it's actually starting to kind of feel like a tech industry in some way, but we'll get more into that in the episode. That's why in today's landscape, you don't have to be limited to the industries per se anymore. Instead, it's better to focus on developing skills that you can apply in many ways, because a lot of the skills that you can pick up from agriculture, you can transfer to food manufacturing or vice versa, even into the tech industry somehow. So enough with that introduction, let's get on with the show. Hello, Marc. Thanks for taking time out of your summer day to come speak with me on the podcast. I'm wanting to learn more about what you do and kind of dive more into the agricultural side of the food industry. I know I talk a lot to people in food manufacturing, processing, but of course we can't do all those things without the lovely produce that comes from farmers and those types of things. So thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Love sharing our story, my family story, and sharing some of the challenges that we face as an agricultural industry. These types of things need to be talked about more in society. So it's really my pleasure.
Awesome. And I know that we're going to I know that we're going to address some of those things. I mean, being in Ontario, there's such a large agricultural base and it's hard to start, I know these issues are going to start getting talked about even more from just the consumer level, the non-farmer, because, you see it on the news and I think more people need to know. But before we get into all that type of stuff, we got to first know a little bit more about you. I think we should get started by first learning more about Sandy Shore Farms. And I like to start off our guests by knowing a little bit about your career journey and what you do.
Yeah, so let me start out by telling you a little bit of history about my family and how we kind of started this business here. So the Wall family farmed the Russian steppes, that's modern day Ukraine, for many, many years. Interestingly, my grandpa's grandpa owned a brick factory as well as a paper mill there. But anyways, my great-great-grandfather, originally from Holland, immigrated into Canada in the 1920s. They started farming in Niagara, mainly in orchard fruit. And then in the 1940s, my family moved their farming business into Norfolk and saw that opportunity to kind of grow the agricultural business here. And over time, we kind of realized that, there's excellent potential to grow vegetables here in Norfolk. They call it the Norfolk Sand Plain. Norfolk is referred to as Ontario's garden. So my grandpa started to plant asparagus in the 1950s, 1960s, and the business grew and grew. And my dad and my uncle took over, and slowly but surely, my dad and my uncle are moving out of the business and into retirement. And it's myself and my cousin taking the reins, taking on responsibility. And it's scary but exciting. Very, very fortunate to be in the position that we are. My dad and my uncle and my grandpa's grandpa. I mean, this comes from a very, very long story of struggle and success. So, but right now, as Sandy Shore stands, we are a grower, packer, processor, and shipper of asparagus, bell pepper, and onion. We focus on value-added products, so we don't like to grow something unless we can do something cool to it, add value. Asparagus, for example, we grow, grade, pack, and ship all over North America. But as far as, what my job is here, I run sales, but I do wear a lot of different hats. It's always unpredictable, and that's what I really like about it. But it's about working together as a team. I really love my staff. They're one of the biggest reasons that I come into work each day. In agriculture, every day you're adapting to change, and whether that's in sales arrangements, logistical problem solving, it's always different. Well, I grew up on the farm. Me and my friends, we used to call it the middle of nowhere. We all wanted to get out of the rural community and into the big cities because that's where all the action was happening. I went to university, spent my first year in Waterloo, and transferred over to Concordia in Montreal. There I got my fill of the big city, and I loved it. It was a great experience. At the end of it, I got my degree in political science. I feel like university teaches you how to analyze. It teaches you how to think. It's not necessarily you have to go and be in that field that you studied in. It's more about you kind of gain that base knowledge of analyzing things and working in teams and presenting. And at the end of my degree, I was ready to come home. The farm was calling me. I had my fill of the big city. So I came back and I thought, okay, I'll kind of use this as a springboard to my career, whether that's in politics but I really started enjoying working in agriculture. One of the biggest reasons why I started enjoying it was this sense of being a part of a team and being a part of kind of a greater purpose. And a lot of it's also problem solving. There's so much that gets thrown our way in the agriculture industry that you have to be good at problem solving and you have to be reactive. And I love problem solving. It was about that fulfillment through knowing that you're feeding people something very healthy. That was one thing that it was kind of like this enlightenment that I had. I didn't really understand that growing up, but when I came back, I understood it. It's like, wow, what we're doing here is enhancing people's lives, and that's what life should be about.
Wow. There's so many things and so many different places that I could take a conversation with what you said, because, you're talking about change, you're talking about agriculture. And like the first thing that stands up, like I mentioned before we talked, is for me, I call myself suburbia. I don't quite call myself a city person, even though Mississauga is, because I do live in like the total suburbs.
Yeah.
And for me, like agriculture is totally out there for me in terms of like, I don't have a family farm to call home. And it's always been, I've heard that people in rural areas want to get out, see the city, but I feel like for someone like me, I've always questioned, do I want to go into agriculture? Because it's such a different thing for me and it's hard to imagine. And so to hear that you kind of came to the realization to come back, but as someone I can agree with university, it does teach you how to think. And I could imagine that applying those problem solving skills coming back, because again, we think of like technology being this new and exciting thing, but I was thinking about it, like agriculture is, there's so much change that happens. You don't just, it's not the same weather every day. You deal with different family, different, all these types of things. And I can see it being exciting if you just look at it from a good perspective.
What's interesting is when we go and hire, we post job ads, it's not people locally here typically that are applying. It's people from the city. There is a new interest, especially from big city in agriculture. People want to get involved.
I've never heard that yet. So I was like, before we were here, I was like Googling like how to see how close I was to you. So yeah. I know exactly how far it is now from what you're saying. So that's really interesting. Do you happen to know what sparked their interest? I know that might be diverting from your story, but I'm just curious.
I think it has to do with the pandemic. People want to get out of the city and they want careers that are outside of the city. I know that's not everyone, but I think a good percentage of people have kind of changed their mentality in that way, where get out into the rural areas, not be so condensed and crowded in cities. And so this kind of provides them with that opportunity.
One thing that you mentioned earlier is that Sandy Shore Farms is a family business, and that is one of the things that you really enjoyed or kind of drew you back to coming home. Can you talk to what that feels like? Or when you say family farms, does it mean like your whole family is involved? Is it just, you mentioned your cousin? How is that atmosphere?
I'm one of four partners of the business here. So there's my dad, there's my uncle, and my cousin. Working with family is difficult, but it also is really, really rewarding. And I always say, we can disagree with one another, we can fight, we can have success together, but at the end of the day, we're always going to be family. We're always going to look out for each other. And that kind of creates a really cool bond within business. It's like no matter what problem comes our way, we're in this together, and if we fail together. If we succeed, we succeed together.
So moving on to the role that you're doing, because you are the VP of sales, what does your job actually look like? What do you do on a day-to-day, especially coming from selling a product that is in its raw state, essentially?
It's a constantly changing environment. Some days you have these moments of excitement. So you have these good problems. You land that contract with that customer for peeled onions or for bell pepper, for asparagus. And you just got to figure out, okay, what are the logistics to achieve their spec, or to deliver what they need on time. Those are the good days. Those are the good problems to have. There are also bad days where you're dealing with the inevitability of late deliveries, or sometimes we're dealing with some off-spec products. So you kind of have to adapt and, look for different outlets and options for your product. So for example, customer can reduce their order size, or it has happened where a customer reduces their order size, but the product is already shipped. And it's like, well, what do I do with that extra product? It's things like this where really have to be, and again, it's about problem solving and adapting and on the fly. Yeah, POs change on the fly. It's really frustrating. You have to figure out how to satisfy that customer who only wants, that one or two pallets of product in Boston or Toronto. And, how do you justify sending those pallets out that far? You got to fill that truck. So you're getting on the phone and you're trying to sell product to fill that truck. In produce and raw produce, you are constantly racing against the shelf life of your product. And that's what makes it very, very challenging. For example, asparagus has a 2-week shelf life once harvested. So you have to get it into your facility, cool it down, grade it, pack it, ship it, and get it into the customer's door within that 2 weeks. And then it's got to last, a week on the shelf. So the same thing with bell pepper. Once processed, this stuff has 4 days of shelf life. You have to get that product to the customer before it goes bad on you. You're constantly being chased by the fear of your product going bad. It's challenging. So with the right team in place, the right systems in place, it's manageable. And yeah, it's difficult, but it's manageable, and you can flourish if you do it correctly.
Oh my gosh, I totally forgot. Like, it didn't even occur to me. Yeah, the shelf, like selling like canned goods is especially different than a fresh produce. I forgot. Yeah, shelf life is actually a thing.
Yeah, I mean, like if we were pumping out widgets here, sale didn't go through that I was expecting. Okay, well, just inventory it and we'll sell it elsewhere. With asparagus or with vegetables, order drops and all of a sudden you have this extra inventory. You better get on the phone because that it's kind of like a ticking time bomb.
Well, this might be a silly question, but I'm not aware. When it comes to for your particular products, how does shipping actually happen? Is it just regular? Do you use like an outside company for picking up orders in their refrigerated trucks, or how is the process once it leaves the farm to, like, let's just say, going to a standard grocery store?
We'll load trucks up full of cases. Let's use the asparagus for you. So I load a truck up full of asparagus. It then gets delivered to, let's say, a retailer's DC, a distribution center, and then the DC accepts the product or they don't accept the product based on their spec. And then from there, that DC, they have trucks distributing to each and every store. At that point, the produce managers take the product and put it on the shelves.
Okay. DC is distribution centers, correct?
That's it.
Well, one of the things I know you guys grow is asparagus, and actually bell peppers. They're one of my favorite vegetables. I can eat bell peppers like no problem as a snack. It's hands down. But I have to say asparagus is honestly my summer go-to every summer.
That's good to hear.
I look forward to Ontario. Nothing tastes as good as Ontario asparagus.
Music to my ears. We need more people like you
Oh, you should. I'm lucky. I go my boyfriend's family. He's the summer produce guy, and like
Okay.
when it's in season, he's making sure that everyone eats it. But asparagus is my go-to, and I look forward to it because I get it from other places like Mexico and I just don't bother because it just does not taste as good as the stuff that you get in the grocery store when it's in prime. It's
Yeah.
just amazing.
Oh, that's so good to hear. And it's true. It has a lot to do with shelf life, the logistics of getting a product that has such a fragile shelf life out of Mexico or Peru and delivering it into our local markets. I mean, good on these guys for doing it. I mean, I can't imagine how difficult that might be for them sometimes. The end result is just kind of like you said,
Hmm.
lots of times the product isn't fresh because it's been on a truck for when we hit in local season, it's almost like a different product.
Yes.
It's fresh, it's crunchy. Typically our spear size is much larger
Mhm.
than Peruvian or Mexican asparagus. So but yeah, let's keep spreading the good word about asparagus. I
It's one of my favorite vegetables when it's in season, and I don't take it for granted that I'm in Ontario. So, but to that, I'd wanted to actually know how asparagus is grown. I did see a picture. It might go to a little part of the conversation that I know that we had a very late snowfall this one time this year, and I remember you showing a picture of like snow and asparagus, and I was looking at the date of the picture, and I'm thinking it's from like last year, and I'm like, oh my god, this is from like this week. So
Yep.
I wanted
That
to
was
know.
that was my dad. So he took that picture, and we actually had spears out of the ground late April, and that's sometimes good because you can go and harvest it, get the early market price, and people go crazy over it. I think it was like half a foot of snow,
Yeah.
and I've never seen it where it's like that, where there are spears up, and then there's a blanket of snow covering the spears. It was yeah, that was a very interesting day.
I can imagine. But to go back though, I kind of fault on my end. I kind of skipped ahead to talking about the snow story. But would
No,
you
it's
just
okay.
be able to walk me a little through about how asparagus is grown? I know that the spears come out of the ground, but I'm not too much familiar with anything else. So could you maybe talk about that?
Yeah, for sure. So we go in, we plant from direct seed, we grow these plants into crowns, we transplant, dig them up, and you can fire these crowns into rows. You get your roots in the ground. After that, you have to wait 3 years before you harvest. And that's something a lot of people aren't aware of. You cannot go out and harvest anything. Some guys go out in their third year and do a light harvest, but
Uh-huh.
it is definitely a long-term investment. So you wait your 3 years, and in those 3 years, you're taking care of that plant as best as you possibly can, because first years of development are very, very important for your long-term health. So you need to nurture these young plants. You got to hit it with water, make sure it's getting the right nutrients, spraying it. And so after your third year, you can start harvesting. And in Ontario and most of Canada, actually, the harvest season is May and June. The lifespan of an asparagus plant is about 20 years if treated correctly. And that's another
Wow.
piece of information that a lot of people aren't aware of.
So I wanted to go back to what we had talked about earlier in the conversation in terms of I'm someone who is from suburbia. And one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast, because I want to share with more people about these careers in this industry. And for someone I find me who doesn't have roots in agriculture, it might be harder for me to just step into something new. So I wanted to know why you think that young people should consider a career in agriculture, even if they don't come from this agricultural background.
Absolutely. So I feel like it is such a rewarding industry to be in. And lots of people, even working in the industry, don't maybe recognize that you're really like you're feeding people healthy food. You're giving them access to healthy food. You're contributing positively to society in a way where you're enhancing people's lives. So that is such a great reason to join a job or to be involved in some. As far as like how do you get into it? get a degree in agronomy or a food safety degree or a food scientist degree like yourself. Farmers are looking for food safety coordinators, lab technicians, scouts on their field, even engineers. We just recently hired a mechanical engineer to oversee our plant operations. Robots, like we have 4 robots on our floor. We've got these crazy cool pieces of equipment that grade asparagus. They're out of Germany. These pieces of equipment, they're able to literally take pictures of like 6 to 8 pictures of every spear getting passed through that machine. That computer decides, okay, it's this grade, that, and so I'm going to drop it at this outlet, sort of thing. There is so much technology within agriculture right now, and I feel like we're kind of experiencing a technological revolution within agriculture. So don't think that, a job in agriculture, even in food factories, I mean, it's exciting because there's so much new and cool stuff happening. We're trying to get robots out in our fields, and there are a few prototypes where the technologies that they're using, lasers to kill weeds. I mean, if we can do that, we can get rid of some of the herbicides that we use and kind of move more towards that organic side of things. So, but really, I mean, anyone with the right attitude, with the right work ethic can be involved in the agriculture industry. Apply to work on a farm. There's tons of businesses like mine looking for people to work. Farms are experiencing labor shortages, so apply today.
Well, if they hear the podcast, here you go, everyone. We've touched upon about why the agricultural place is a great place to work and those types of things. So I'm trying to think where I want to get to this conversation. Well, for me, I got to pop in my head is for asparagus. We've talked about how it grows, all these types of things, how good it tastes, but how is the best way to eat your asparagus? How should I do it if I get it?
Okay, here we go. Number 1, you have to go find the biggest asparagus, the largest diameter asparagus you can find at the grocery store. There is a common misconception in society where people think that a large diameter asparagus is woody, not tender, not sweet. It is totally wrong. The larger diameter asparagus is sweeter. Tenderness has to do with freshness. It's nothing to do with diameter. So if you're getting it locally, it's going to be fresh, hopefully. So go out and grab those big jumbo asparagus from the shelf and then throw it on the grill. That's the best way. Olive oil, garlic, grilling asparagus is by far and away my favorite way of eating it. So there you go.
Well, you just blew some of my misconceptions because
there
I'll
you
be
go.
honest, I'm on that camp.
Yeah. So hopefully some of your listeners, I can, sway toward the larger diameters.
We are coming to the end of our conversation. So before I go, I do want to ask you 2 questions. Well, 3 maybe we could say. With the first one being, I always like to ask our guests, what piece of advice would you give to a young person who wants to go into the agricultural industry or maybe work in your field? Or it could be general life advice. You pick.
Okay. Don't give up. I mean, you're going to face so many challenges in your life, and there's always a way to figure out that problem. And it's about solution-based thinking. I mean, if you can, it's the difference between saying, this is a problem, period, to this is a problem, but here are some potential solutions. And that is something that I encourage my staff to do every day. In life, if you can be solution-based in your thinking, you're going to succeed.
I think that's great advice. And I think that it's something that we all need to hear, especially me sometimes. So thank you for sharing that. And I hope everyone takes it. And the last 2 questions I'll ask you, they're kind of intertwined, but first one being, where can we find Sandy Shore Farms produce if we wanted to purchase some? And where can we find you?
We ship into all the major retailers, in Canada, so coast to coast. So in May and June, make sure that you're going to retail and looking for that local asparagus. But as far as how to find me and how to connect with me on LinkedIn. LinkedIn it's my absolute favorite tool in my business right now. I love connecting. I mean, the reason that you and I are talking today is because of LinkedIn.
That is true.
There's so many, and maybe this kind of goes back to like what I want to say to people who want to work in the food industry. Well, get on LinkedIn, create your resume, and start connecting with people. It's crazy the people that you can connect with. It didn't used to be like this. You'd have to like phone and go through brokers to find the buyers, and now you can, with a few keystrokes, you can search different businesses. You can connect with people that you would never been able to connect with otherwise. It's great. I feel like it's like a LinkedIn commercial right now.
Hey, that's what I hear most people say. Like all my guests, there was like LinkedIn. And I gotta agree. It's amazing how much the world has opened up to, like, I feel like I can connect with people and it's just LinkedIn. So yeah, there you go, people. It'll be in the show notes. I'll make sure that you can connect to Marc if you so wish so.
Please do. I'd love to meet new people. So
I love it. Well, with that, thank you so much, Marc, for coming on this show. This conversation just got me so excited about just learning more. And I do feel a little step closer to knowing more and knowing that even if I graduate, if I choose to go in the agriculture, they need people like me. So
yeah,
thanks for sharing that.
It's been my pleasure. Happy to do it.
That was episode 29 of the FoodGrads Podcast. All the notes to this podcast can be found on the FoodGrads blog or by clicking the Student and Grads tab on the homepage. There you can find any notes to past or future episodes. Do you know anyone you would like me to interview on the show? Perhaps yourself, or a specific career path you would like me to explore? Then reach out and let me know. You can email me at veronica@foodgrads.com or any of the FoodGrads social media channels. Hope to hear from you. I really enjoyed this conversation with Marc because he is a great storyteller. So many times through the conversation, I could just visualize in my head the people and stories he was talking about. I'm really happy I could share this with others, and I'm so grateful to farmers for keeping us fed. This was just another reminder of that. Anyways, that's it for this week's episode. Thank you everyone so much for listening, and I will see you next time.